Welcome. So, hello, Greg. How are you?
Hello.
Welcome to another session of the Global Expert Community this year. Tonight, we're going to have Greg Myers with us. Greg is going to talk on how VR training can help and support companies and everyone who wants to do some training. So, Greg Myers, the stage is yours.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Inesio. Very pleased to be here. So yeah, welcome everybody to the Global XR Conference. I'm really happy to be presenting this session today titled Affordably Developing VR Training Simulators. And as the session notes listed, custom developed virtual training simulators offer many advantages to organizations, but they can also be expensive to develop. So this session is going to discuss a number of strategies for developing VR simulators economically, and I'm going to provide a collection of relevant case studies that discuss the return on investment of deploying VR training simulators. So just a quick introduction. My name is Greg Myers. I'm the CEO of Forge Effect Simulations and one of the co-founders. I've got about 30 years of professional software development experience with a background in video game development, internet application, training simulator, and mixed reality application development. I co-founded Forge Effect Simulations about 20 years ago with my two partners to explicitly use video game engine technology and tools to build training simulators. And we develop training simulators across a wide array of industries, everything from mining to healthcare to air transportation to defense. And we were very early adopters and specialized in the development of custom mixed reality training simulators, AR, VR, and mixed reality. And so really at the heart of what we do is we are software developers. We develop training simulation software, primarily that runs on mixed reality devices that allow our customers to provide training, be it complicated pieces of equipment, complex devices, or intensive processes that they need to really take a lot of time training for, that a virtual reality training simulator can help them do these types of training safely. And so we've had the benefit of working with a number of great clients, like I mentioned, across a wide array of different industries. And I'm going to present a number of the different training simulators that we've built for a variety of our clients over the course of this presentation. So I'm going to focus on these 4 different training simulators that we've built, all VR simulators Vermeer, Stratitech, JLG, and Global Ground Support. And I'll go into what each of these different VR simulators do throughout my presentation. And my talking points, I'm going to define virtual reality training simulators. I'm going to define their benefits and the return on investment, and then discuss some of the factors that affect the cost of developing custom VR training simulators, and then examine strategies for developing custom VR training simulators more economically. So, first of all, what is a VR training simulator? Probably everybody knows who's attending this conference, but just to be completely comprehensive, conceptually, VR, from our perspective, is just the latest step, or one of the latest steps in the evolutionary stage of storytelling, right? First, we had spoken word, and then there were cave paintings, and then books, and radio, and television, and interactive computers, and smartphones, and now VR and AR and mixed reality. So it's really, conceptually nothing new. It's just a different way of delivering stories and experiences to people. And then definition-wise, a VR training simulator is a software application that leverages stereoscopic 3D to create highly immersive interactive learning environments where trainees can experience realistic simulations of the jobs they have to practice for. Really an activity where they can interact with virtual equipment, environments, materials, procedures, and reduce the cost of using those physical assets, while at the same time giving a lot of access to the virtual versions. And then finally, it's a training program that allows folks to learn by doing, really put hands-on virtual elements and really go through the steps of doing things so they have a firm understanding of the tasks they'll need to be responsible for in their job. And so a VR training simulator is just that. It is a virtual reality headset connected to a software application that allows someone to have this experience. What you're seeing here is a virtual reality training simulator we built for JLG Industries. We've been working with them for more than a decade, developing training simulators for them. And a lot of what we produce for them nowadays is VR training simulators. Taking a closer look at this application a little bit, we developed this program with JLG. They're the largest provider of access equipment, so telehandlers, scissor lifts, aerial work platforms. And you're going to see these pieces of equipment everywhere after this presentation if you haven't already. They're the largest distributor of these pieces of equipment, very large, dangerous pieces of equipment if you don't know what you're doing. And so we built a training simulator for them that allows them to train operators on all the different types of machines they use, the different controls. It's a networked multi-user application as well, so folks can connect from regardless where they are in the physical world and conduct training sessions with trainers and trainees, really allowing them to conduct training at a level they really couldn't before when they were beholden to the physical world. So we take advantage of all the latest and greatest VR tools to allow them to conduct safe training. And really, the simulator that we built for them, this is, again, part of our evolutionary step that I was discussing. JLG Industries, we initially started working with them developing PC-based simulators. We then moved to touchscreen iPad-based simulators. But it wasn't really until VR, consumer-based VR, became possible that we could really elevate their training simulators to what we like to call the VR superpowers. And so there's a lot of benefits of VR. Hitting on the high ones, stereoscopic vision is one of the big ones, especially for training simulators. It's great to be able to teach someone how to use the actual piece of equipment, but it's a whole nother thing being able to put them in the field and have them practice spatial awareness challenges, use depth perception, really take advantage of the fact that you have stereoscopic vision and you can show someone distance in VR. Next up is head tracking. So being able to see the virtual world the same way you see the real world just by moving your head really gives you a sense of presence in the world that is unlike any other computing experience. And the same is true for positional tracking. Being able to move your body and have the simulator just react to the way you're moving your head and your body really gives you a sense of agency. It allows you to have a suspension of disbelief and really dig into the training that the virtual simulator is giving you because you feel comfortable there. And then last but not least, hand tracking. We utilize hand tracking to a really wide degree these days. Hand tracking allows you to interact with virtual controls and see what your hands are doing while you're in a virtual environment. But it also allows us to sometimes eliminate real-world controls from the simulation station so that users are just interacting with virtual software-based tools, which also reduces the cost of development if you don't have to include real world integration. And then, while not specifically a VR feature, multi-user is one of the features that we add to almost all of our training simulators these days, and it adds a level of complexity that just makes the simulator that much more useful and really adds to the amount of time and benefit that trainees can get out of it, because instead of it just being a one-on-one experience with the computer, they're able to connect with other trainees, with trainers, collaborate, work as they would in the real world, without having to travel and all the logistics of locating a piece of machine to use. They can use virtual machines and connect with trainees regardless of where they are in the physical world. And then kinetic effects. We like to add kinetic effects whenever possible. A lot of people think VR and they think that's just audio. I'm sorry, just visual effects, but it's really audio, visual, as well as kinetic effects. So being able to use haptic feedback to let someone feel a rumble or feel a bump when a machine hits something. It's really just another level in creating a realistic effect that a trainee will start to believe in and benefit from the training, as opposed to saying, this doesn't feel real, let me skip to the next thing. Excuse me. And so this product resulted in this Access Ready Fusion XR, which is a product that we developed for JLG Industries. Initially started as an internal product, but now this is a product that you can buy directly from JLG. They turned it from a internal training simulator to a profit center, where now you're able to purchase this just like any of their other machines. So what are the benefits of VR training simulators? Lots of benefits. I broke it down to the big three for this presentation. So first one, increased engagement and knowledge retention. Excuse me. So for this point, I want to talk about Stratotech Education Group. This is a client of ours that hired us to build a welding training simulator that runs on the Oculus Quest 2. This application is a very important part of their curriculum because it allows folks to train anytime, anywhere, and really engagement and knowledge retention is their number one priority. And so how do we pull that off? Immersion. So VR allows us to immerse our users in the environment. So the same welding school they see when they go into the physical world, we recreate that in the virtual world. The same tools they use, the same materials, everything that they're doing in the real world, we try to replicate in the virtual world. So it's a very familiar experience. And they feel immersed in it, and they feel comfortable, and they spend a lot of time doing it, and they retain information at a higher level. And next up is interaction. So VR is great because it allows you to see things in stereoscopic 3D and really have an immersive experience that way. But it also allows you to interact with everything in the world. And interacting with stuff is how trainees really gain knowledge. You don't want them just to be a passive audience member. You want them to be an active participant in the training process. So being able to interact with things really allows them to start picking up the different tools, learning how to use them, familiarizing themselves with the materials, how different things interact with each other, make mistakes that in the real world would be catastrophic accidents. And in a virtual reality simulator, it becomes a learning experience. So really giving users the ability to do anything that they want to do and make mistakes is paramount. We always like to say, you wouldn't build a flight simulator that doesn't allow you to crash the plane. We want the trainee to crash the plane in the simulator so it doesn't happen in the real world. Another benefit of VR is just the lack of distraction. When you're wearing a VR headset, you're not looking at your watch, you're not looking at your 6 other screens, you're not looking at your inbox, your lunch, talking to a coworker. You are completely focused on the content. And that is a really wonderful thing to have. If you're a trainer trying to keep trainees focused, that is difficult. And then finally, gamification. So we're really able to increase engagement and retention by leveraging video game techniques, not necessarily entertainment-based, but things like score and achievements and leaderboards, trying to add that competitive nature to the application so trainees want to spend more time in it. They see their coworker get a better score than them, and they want to run through the training one more time just to beat them. That is a rare thing to see when trainees want to run through training more. And so this application really led to a phenomenal piece of software that Meta themselves took notice of and they did a marketing
opportunities for himself as a welder,
Hopefully my audio
and the
is
time he
coming
invested
through.
in virtual training through Forge
And so,
FX to make it happen.
Meta is very interested in
Addressing the shortage
hardware
of skilled
being used
workers
not
in
just for
today's
entertainment
industries
purposes, but also
by
for work
providing
purposes.
access to
And
additional
so
training
they
and
are,
career growth.
highlighting a lot
These
of
are the
training
ways
solutions
skilled
that
trade
both
professionals at
devices
Tulsa Welding School are
specifically
using the
used to engage
metaverse
users
today.
to pass on knowledge and to be used for training simulator purposes. So they were really happy with this product. And we've actually recently become a Meta Technology partner, which really allows us to get access to some of the more advanced features that we can leverage to engage users even more. So next up, one of the benefits of VR training simulators is they are a very cost-effective program. And this talk is all about how to develop things affordably. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how cost-effective the training programs can be themselves. One of the applications we built that I'm actually most proud of is the Global Ground Support Aircraft De-icing Simulator. This is a VR-based simulator for Global Ground Support, the largest manufacturer of aircraft de-icing trucks. And their biggest challenge was, how do you train operators year-round for a seasonal job that only happens when the atmospheric conditions are correct to de-ice? So, of course, they turned to a training simulator, and we built a fully functioning VR training simulator that takes the real-world controls off their de-icing trucks and allows them to choose any type of aircraft, any type of atmospheric conditions. Again, another multi-user training simulator, so trainees and trainees can connect together. Two operators who operate on either side of the aircraft can practice together, really giving them this ability to train year-round for something that is only done, less than half the year. And so one of the things that it really led to was reduced travel costs. So rather than moving equipment all around the country for training and flying trainers all around the world and lodging and putting up trainees and taking them away from their jobs, we're able to conduct virtual training that removes a lot of those travel logistics and thus reduces costs. At the same time, it gives increased access to the trainee. So rather than having to wait for a machine to not be used for production, they're able to be using the training simulator 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, regardless of atmospheric conditions or any of the other constraints that physical equipment provides. And then one of the constraints that physical equipment provides is expensive consumables. Whenever you're running this, for example, de-icing truck, you're burning oil, you're burning gas, you're spraying expensive glycol fluids to de-ice the aircraft. And those costs add up during training. And so a training simulator that uses virtual consumables burns no oil, no gas, no actual glycol is sprayed. And so it's a real savings to be able to not be incurring those costs during training. And then you get a reduced rate of accidents. So the training simulator specifically teaches folks not to crash into the aircraft, not to spray into an engine, not to spray into an air intake valve, really focusing on the end result we want from the trainee, being a much safer environment, fewer accidents, and much less cost involved with those accidents. And then increased employee satisfaction. One of the things we hear from all our customers is that in addition to loving the simulator, all of their trainees love it. They feel like their employers are putting a real emphasis on training and getting them the latest and greatest, and not just handing them, a dust-covered printed binder from 25 years ago. They're really feeling like they're working for an organization that is taking advantage of the latest and greatest. And then finally, as I mentioned, on-demand conditions. So waiting around for the right atmospheric conditions to train a de-icer is not what you want to be doing, because that's when you want them de-icing. So if you can have on-demand virtual weather conditions that you can train for, and then when the real conditions hit, you're trained up and ready to go, now you've got an efficient system, as opposed to kind of being reliant on what the weather throws at you. And to that point, this simulator was actually used by and is still used by the United States Air Force.
Including the type of de-icing truck
and
to
they
use,
estimated that
the
it
type
saved
of
them,
aircraft
I
to
believe,
de-ice,
$2 million
the
in just the first year
type of
alone in
and a number
consumables.
of other
You can see here the screen where they're able to
simulation
choose
gives
the
the
different
operator
environmental
full control
settings They're able to choose different aircraft to de-ice based on the wind and precipitation types. They choose different types of type 1, type 4 glycol. There are different hold times that they're able to adhere to. We're monitoring everything that they do in a simulation session. So at the end of it, trainers can look at trainees' records and say, okay, Greg did everything great, but why is he spraying, into this engine? Let's bring him in here and discuss just engine spraying. And we're able to deliver performance analysis results that feed directly into a learning management system. So there's a real record of how the trainings are doing. Okay, the next benefit I'd like to discuss is safe learning environments. Accidents during training are awful, and oftentimes you need to be training for practices that aren't safe, that are very risky. And so how do you do that? Again, virtual training simulators. So Vermeer Corporation, they are the largest manufacturer of horizontal directional drills. These are large pieces of construction equipment that are meant to drill long distances underground for pulling pipelines, water main lines, fiber optic cables. And the challenge here is that, you are drilling underground. You can't see what's underground, and there's a lot of other stuff under there, and you need to not hit it in order to do your job correctly. So by training virtually, we eliminate that physical risk. We give you the ability to learn all of the controls, learn the conceptual nature of drilling underground and kind of visualizing it in your mind, as well as we give you the advantage to hit that gas line and blow up the block if you need to, albeit virtually, so you don't make that mistake in the real world. And then in VR, you really have the ability to repeat over and over and over until you feel comfortable. So rather than having a limited amount of time with a machine, you have as much time as you need for repetition, and repetition leads to muscle memory, which just leads to safer operators who have more confidence. Controlled conditions again, just like I mentioned for the aircraft de-icing simulator, being able to control the conditions in any type of simulator. Here we're drilling underground, and so we want to be able to control things like what's the density of the ground, what's the temperature, how hard is the ground, what's the liquefaction of it. So really being able to choose, what environment the user is going to be training in, as well as maybe dropping in a water main line or a gas main line to see how this operator deals with these different hazards. And then personal feedback. We always deliver user analysis reports at the end of our simulation sessions because we're able to track every single thing that the user is doing. And that really allows you to deliver a personalized feedback loop that the training simulator doesn't just tell you, well, you passed, you failed. It says, okay, here's how you did on every single activity. So Dave took this activity. He looks like he did great on everything except thread grease. Looks like he's forgetting to put thread grease on. So let's bring him in here and discuss greasing the threads just so that we don't have that problem in the real world. So it really allows you to deliver targeted feedback to your trainees when they need it most. And this application is really a great example of a very complicated piece of machinery, a very complicated process, and something that, as we all know, it's very hard to find operators these days. And so organizations like Vermeer are struggling to fill these operator positions. And so by developing virtual training simulators that allow someone to become very comfortable with a piece of machinery that, quite frankly, can do a lot of damage is a very difficult thing. And so they develop with us these training simulators that walk you through every aspect of the job, not just, the piece of machinery, but the concept behind it. We build tutorials for the different types of drills, the different soils that are involved. Again, giving them all the information that they would normally have, but putting it, hard coding it into a training simulator so that they can do knowledge transfer without trainees having to be involved every step of the way. So next up is VR training simulator return on investment. This is probably one of the most important things to focus on when you're thinking about affordability of a training simulator, because it often comes down to the ROI will pay for the simulator itself. So it's not so much about thinking, how do we avoid paying so much for the simulator? It's more about thinking, how do we maximize the ROI? So whenever considering any project, you need to think about the ROI, but obviously training simulators that offer these significant benefits, the cost can oftentimes offset that training. So that's something, offset that cost. That's something really to be aware of. And the way we measure this oftentimes is our training simulators reduce the physical wear and tear on equipment that our customers have to perform. A lot of our customers, have statistics that something like 80% of the damage on equipment is performed by 20% of your least trained operators. And if you can focus on training that 20%, you reduce 80% of your damage to your equipment. So a very easy and tangible metric to track. And so training simulators allow us to get everybody well trained before they ever step foot in a real world piece of equipment. Reduce cost of expensive consumables. I think I mentioned that one already, so I'll skip right ahead. Increased operator familiarity. So a lot of the machines that we train for, okay, sure, I can get someone up and running pretty quickly on basic operation. But to really understand all of the controls and all of the differences and what to do in an accident, it's very easy to not panic when the job's going well. But what does an operator do when the thing's about to tip over? Do they panic, or do they calmly rely on their training? And if their training is good and is giving them full machine familiarity, they should have no problem dealing with emergency circumstances. And reduce training time. One of the things we hear from all our customers, and there's some stats that I'll mention later, some reports that I've pulled that show that overall VR training reduces the amount of time that trainees need to learn different skills. I think there's a Gartner report, or maybe it's a Deloitte report, that estimated that you were able to reduce training time by about 40%, which right away cuts your costs for training almost in half right there. And increased throughput. Another complaint we hear from all our customers is that they have one training machine, they've got a dozen trainees, one guy's on the machine, one guy's watching, 3 guys are on their phone, 2 guys are drinking coffee, and the other guys are missing. Not sure if that adds up to 12, but I think you get the idea. And so with VR training simulators, we're not reliant on only one piece of equipment. Once we write that software, we can copy and paste it and make as many copies as we want. So if there are a dozen trainees or 20 trainees, we can all sit them down at a station and have them practice, as opposed to wasting valuable training time. And here are those studies. I think I'll bring them up now. It's not only about listening to what your customers need and what the return on investment is that your customers are getting. It's important to look at the climate, the economic climate. And so the big 4 accounting firms have all put out studies on VR in the last 2 or 3 years. I pulled these quotes from them just to show you. 72% of businesses believe VR will be an essential part of their business. 76% believe VR training will help them reduce costs. 40% reduction in required training time. That's the one I mentioned before about reducing training time. And then 80% employment increase by using VR. So it is a technology that is gaining traction in the work world as consumer VR becomes more possible. Okay, I'm about halfway through. Let's get into some of the cost stuff. So why are VR training simulators so expensive to develop? What's the issue here? And really, it comes down to 3 things. There's a limited pool of experienced training simulator developers who are also experienced VR developers. And so the distinction here is that you don't want to just hire a VR developer to develop a training simulator, because they might not have the pedagogy knowledge about how to put together training simulators. And you don't want to develop a training simulator that has really no knowledge of VR, because then they're going to be cutting their teeth on your application instead of delivering a very fine-tuned VR training simulator. So a little bit difficult to find those people who have both of those expertise. And then second is that custom VR training simulators are complex to develop. They are not simple applications. They require a high level of technical expertise in areas like 3D modeling and programming, and require a large amount of quality assurance testing. We estimate that that VR applications take about 35% more QA time than a traditional flat screen application, just due to all of the complexities of a VR application. And then finally, VR training simulators require custom content sometimes. So assets can be time consuming and expensive to create, especially if you're looking to create highly realistic content. So those are some of the, kind of things that are outside of your control. Diving in a little bit deeper, kind of the client requirements, what your customer is telling you, and sort of the things that drive your scope that will increase the cost of your simulator, and things to keep an eye on and manage are size and complexity. So the number of lessons, the number of tasks, the number of tools, materials, quantify what you're building. And for a pilot project, certainly try to scale it down as small as possible. The level of realism. Obviously, you want things to be as near photorealistic as possible to suspend disbelief with your user. But if that isn't necessary, perhaps lower level visual fidelity will work for you and lower your time and cost. Adding multi-user. I think I've hit this one a couple times. I'll probably hit it a couple more times. Adding multi-user application functionality to an application takes it from an application where you have X number of pre-built training scenarios that does not change. You've got those ones set. They are what they are. The moment you add multi-user, trainers, trainees, multiple trainers can get together and concoct their own scenarios. They can come up with their own training procedures. So it really takes an application and gives it a much higher extended shelf life. Physical control integration, a phenomenal thing to add to a VR training simulator. Not just training you on the concepts of the machine, how to operate the controls, but really giving you that physical muscle memory. Sometimes it's overkill, and if we can get away with virtual controls and interact with them with hand tracking, we can lower the cost. But physical control integration does give you a level of realism that allows a trainee to walk directly from your simulator into a real-world piece of equipment and feel comfortable physically. And then finally, learning management system integration, phenomenal thing to have. Great to be able to do performance data analysis on all of your users, but a non-trivial addition and something that sometimes for a pilot project, you want to either just display that information and not try to do the handshake with the learning management system as a way to avoid cost overruns. Okay, so how do we mitigate some of these issues? How do we develop VR training simulators economically? This is what everyone's probably been waiting for, so let's dive into some of this stuff. The first one is use a game engine software development kit. I can't express this one strongly enough. There's a lot of different ways to create VR content these days. There's really no shortage of ways to create VR content. But if you're creating a VR training simulator, you're not creating something that's simple or should be limited. You want to have a very robust engine, so any request that comes from the client to do anything you can think of is possible. You don't want to be limited by your development platform. So choose a very robust development platform at the onset. And maybe a simple way to look at this, if you're not familiar with game engines, is that the game engine takes care of all of the low-level functionality so that you can focus on the domain-specific content, the stuff that's specific to your simulator, and not worry about the graphics engine, the user interface controls, the sound, the physics, the AI. The analogy here is if you wanted to build a chess set, you wouldn't go out and build a lathe to build your chess set. You'd go buy a lathe and use it to build your chess set. So that's really the best advice we can give you here. And luckily these days, there is no shortage in game engines. There's a plethora of development tools out there. You could do a whole session. There probably is one down the hall right now going on about game engines and which one to choose. All great choices. When sort of analyzing your product, though, it does make sense to look into the different limitations of the different engines to make sure you're choosing one, or a development studio that's using one that meets your needs. We are a Unity shop, but really, like I said, there are a lot of great choices out there. And really, the reason that we use game engines for training simulators is that we co-opt a lot of that same game engine technology to develop highly immersive interactive virtual training simulators. And they share a lot of components. So they share environments, they share task-based scenarios, usable objects, avatars, scoring, reporting, and assessment. So it is a natural bridge to basically steal the wheel, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel and say, oh, let's create a training simulation engine, because there are so much assets and money and time already put into these video game engines that it's like having a whole team of developers working for you by leveraging one of those tools. And then there's also a lot of stuff that happens within the simulation that is also very similar to games. So games and simulators all have particle systems, smoke, sparks, dust, 3D audio, sound effects, voice over IP, networking systems, terrain, physics, AI, input systems, haptics, tutorials, scoring. I could really go on and on. The similarities are very sharp. And so it's pretty natural to use a game engine to develop your training simulator. And also, when doing so, you get performance analysis tools, which really needs to be mentioned, because if you're developing a training simulator and you're not using performance analysis tools, and you get to the end of your project and suddenly you have GPU problems or CPU issues and you have to go in and fix them, then It's going to delay your project, and you're going to have schedule and budget overruns. There's just no doubt about that. So knowing this information early on in your development cycle is crucial to staying on schedule. So choosing a platform that has performance analysis tools is highly recommended. And also graphical interface tools. Believe it or not, developing the UI, the graphical user interface that the users interact with, can sometimes eat up as much as 25% of the development budget for the whole application. So you really want to, at all costs, limit the amount of time and effort that's put into developing your user interface. And there are going to be changes all along the way. As you develop your application, you want to be able to add every type of user interface element without having to do any custom coding. So really make sure when choosing a vendor or a developer or a tool that they have a full GUI tool in place. And then obviously this one probably goes without mentioning, but graphic fidelity is paramount importance. Graphics are not just icing. Compelling graphics, like I said, suspend disbelief, they enhance immersion, and they increase the trainee engagement. They really give them a sense that they are in a fully living, breathing world. And the graphics do that. And game engines allow you to have built-in shaders and cross-platform shaders. Again, these are things that allow the realism of the simulation to not only work on one platform, but being able to take your application and deploy it on multiple different headsets, multiple different devices, and know that that realism carries through. And the same thing for multiple graphic APIs. So by supporting lots of different APIs, you're able to deploy your application across a wide set of platforms and devices. And lots more dynamic rendering quality, being able to on the fly determine what rendering quality you should give to a user so they have the best possible experience. And then performance optimization tools, always being able to perform batching and occlusion and culling will always improve performance. So if you're using a tool that doesn't have some of these advanced functionalities, you might find yourself in a bad spot at the end of the project. So again, choose a game engine. And then also, when making that decision, choose one that is able to import as many asset types as possible. You're always going to have a large team working for you, and everyone's got a favorite tool. Not everyone's going to love 3D Studio Max. Someone's going to be a Maya specialist, and someone's going to be a Blender specialist. And you want tools that can import all your different types of 3D models, materials, textures, audio, fonts. You don't want a roadblock in this area because that's just going to delay you and end up costing you time and money. Use pre-built asset libraries whenever possible. You're going to always have to build some custom content when you're building a training simulator, especially domain-specific thing for your customer, whatever process it is. But I think on every project we've worked on, we're always able to leverage some pre-built assets to save us time. And oftentimes, many of these are free as well. So if that's a concern for an initial project, you can always leverage a lot of free pre-built content. I probably should have mentioned this one in choosing a game engine. Always make sure you choose a system that has a character animation system. I mean, we're talking about training humans, right? So we want to be animating humans as well in all the different tasks that we'll be training them on. And animating a toaster, very easy. Animating a human, not so easy. It's proved to be very challenging. So very important to choose a system that's going to allow you to very rapidly create all these different character animations and different transition states that you need to make your simulation believable. Multi-user support. I must have hit this one 2 or 3 times already, but really including multi-user support allows trainees to collaborate. It helps to reduce training costs by removing the need for physical travel. And it really allows you to have a safe environment for trainees to practice in without the risk of injury. And you can really get large groups of people and train for things just as you would in the real world. One of the benefits of the state of device technology is that we can really leverage consumer-grade hardware now for industrial enterprise-based training simulators. A few years ago, this wasn't necessarily true, and the cost was prohibitively expensive to buy a real, enterprise-grade headset. Now, for anywhere from $500 to a few $1,000s, we can buy some really high-performing consumer-based headsets that can work for us in an enterprise state. When developing a system, it's also important that you try to support the widest array of devices. The beauty of some game engine systems is that it's very easy to produce content for all these different devices. But being able to do that is important, especially if you're working for a customer who wants to deploy their application as widely as possible. You're going to want to be able to hit as many different devices as possible. And while I know this is a talk about VR training simulators, it's also important to mention that your application should be able to degrade gracefully, and it should be able to run on a PC, on a smartphone, on a tablet, in a browser. You want to reach the widest possible audience that you can. And so being able to let folks who for some reason cannot access the VR or the AR portion, give them the opportunity to access the content in a traditional flat screen method. Okay, one of the other important things that you can do to really lower the cost of training simulators is to embed analytics in your application. And this will allow developers to really focus on the aspects of the application that are being used. You can see where trainees are getting held up, what parts of the application are causing problems for them, and have your developers fix those rather than fixing things that happen to be on a to-do list that no one's actually using. And then secondly, take advantage of feedback loops. Like, people really love to give feedback for the software they're using. And if you can get that feedback and you can incorporate it into your process and let the developers fix things that come back from the feedback loop instead of just things that they think might be helpful, you really start to produce applications that help people. And again, when the application has more value, it outweighs the cost to develop. Next up is to design in a modular design. So whenever you're given a big application, always try to break it down into the smallest components. This will reduce development time. Developing things modularly, you can break things up amongst teams. It also allows you to deploy the different modules separately. So it maybe allows you to repurpose stuff. And then it also allows you to scale very quickly. So we want to start with pilot projects with our clients, but very quickly after the pilot, they want to scale very quickly. So a modular design allows us to bring in more developers, more artists, and increase the throughput of the work that we're doing. And one of the ways that we do that is we have our own intellectual property called the Forge Sim framework, which is our basically simulation-based training, domain-specific application framework that contains components for every single thing that we do, and we're able to reuse these components over and over and over. Scalable. So again, modular design falls right into this. Build things that are scalable. So start with the core requirements, just build the essentials. Then use that modular design that I mentioned to break things out and look for other opportunities to build small, well-defined application components. Use standard interface protocols. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Again, use things that are tried and true methods of interacting with the application. And then, it really wouldn't be a discussion. I know we're running up against the cap pretty quickly here. But it really wouldn't be a discussion about how to build applications, VR training simulation applications affordably without discussing funding, right? So from our perspective, there are really three avenues to get funding. There are a lot of other ones, but these are the three main ones. Corporate sponsorship. So obviously, getting sponsorship from a company to build a training simulator for you is a great idea. Government grants. There are a lot of great government grants out there. The NSF, SBIR, the Department of Defense has a couple different ones, Mantech in particular. Department of Energy has SBV. And then venture capital. There's a lot of interest in VR training simulators from VC these days. And let's see, another way to save money, just want to throw this one out there. It's not always right for the corporate environment, but there are a number of phenomenal open source tools and platforms for doing VR development. So if cost is a real problem, you can always rely on open source options to at least get a pilot project or a prototype up and running. And then also in that same vein, rely on community outsourcing. So try to leverage developer communities. You can do crowdfunding for things like developing to get a Kickstarter project going. Use cloud-based development tools so that all of your developers don't have to have lots of expensive hardware. Same thing for rendering and hosting. And then I think I'm wrapping up. I see that my time is almost over here, but last couple points I'll make is, if you were going to install solar panels on your house, you probably wouldn't do it yourself. You'd probably go out and hire an electrician. So you want to hire a professional whenever possible. VR training simulators are no different. They are very complex applications. And if you need to produce, an enterprise-grade training simulator, it's likely that, you're going to want to work with professionals. So that's my number one comment. And then really the second comment on how to develop things affordably is, and I think I've mentioned this a couple times, is to focus on the ROI. It's not so much about the cost to develop the application. It's about reducing the cost of training. It's about increasing employee productivity, increasing employee safety, and reducing accidents. And if your application can do that, then the cost really doesn't matter, because some of those things can cost you millions of dollars, far more than a training simulator would. And somehow I've come in 30 seconds before my cutoff. So I think I will turn it over to questions and answers now. Um, Alessio, please let me know if there's anything I need to do on my side to enable questions and answers.
Don't worry, Greg. Thank you very much for the presentation. I would dare to say that it was more like a masterclass rather than a presentation. Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, aside from talking from what your guys doing, that is an amazing work by with multi users, haptics, and all that KPIs and information and reports that you are generating. It's really, really interesting on how we could do an overview on the developing experiences and trainings and something like this. Congratulations on that. I've got a couple of questions myself. So, if you allow me, it's really sometimes it's really hard to sell trainings like this because not everybody is ready to understand what AVR training can do. And I've seen that you already had a lot of propositions over there. But even though saying all those valuables that we're going to have with the VR training, do you see that the clients are using the information, the KPIs, and all the information that is generated over those trainings, for example? Do you see that? I've seen that you were talking about the LMS connection. Is that something that they are requiring, that they are demanding to have more information to do some evaluation or something like this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, learning management system integration is one of the most highly requested features, because the advantage of a VR training simulator is that we can track every little detail. And depending on the headset, you can track things even like eye tracking. So I can see during a simulation session, where was that trainee looking when I was saying look at this? Were they looking at that, or were they looking somewhere else? And so data from that level all the way down to, did the trainee do the session? How many hours did he spend in it? Did he pass? Did he fail? All of that information is super valuable to a trainer. And especially if you're doing distributed training where you're sending headsets out into the wild and not sure, when your trainees are logging on or when they're doing stuff, having a central hub to be able to look and see how all your distributed trainees are doing is almost paramount and necessary.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree with that. And this is one way of gathering all that data. It's almost really important to try to recover the cost for the next phase, right? For the next development, right? Because sometimes when we get to develop something like this, we got like an innovation fund to develop that. But after that, if we need to do another one, funding might be hard if we don't have data. So when we have data, it's much easier, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and let me ask you another thing. What about the hype of the metaverse? How because we're totally looking for VR over here in your presentation, and then we are talking about a technology that is being over in the market for a long time. Now, with the hype of metaverse, how did it affect you? Was it good for you? Is it bad for you? How do you see that?
That's a good question. Um, I think at a high level, the metaverse was good for us because it brought it into the public vernacular. People were speaking about it as a real thing instead of this conceptual science fiction techie thing. It really became, a thing. Um, I think that some of the hype, though, has, for any technology hype train, there's always the hype train and then there's a crash. And VR has seen that a couple of times. It's had, its share of ups and downs. But I think that seeing companies like Meta, who are investing billions of dollars into the development of it and into the hardware and into the software to be able to manage devices, there is there's clearly a lot of big corporation push into this area. And so, hype aside, if you can kind of focus on where the money is going and seeing that the money is going into this area, it's clear that it's a technology that's here to stick around.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Greg, thank you very much again for your presentation. Thank you very much for your time. We are going a little bit over time right now. Please, if you are watching this video and you're very interested to get his presentation, he's going to share in our Discord channel. Just follow up the question, the instructions, and you can get his presentation over there. Greg, thank you very much for your time, and see you then.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Inesio, and thank you everybody for attending. Hope you have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.